This is lesson 7, the really short lesson on the electromagnetic spectrum. And to start off with, we have photons. Now, photons are those little tiny bits of light. If you were to get the smallest amount of light you possibly can have, you'd have one photon, or one little packet of light. What's interesting about photons is that they act like little particles, just like in an atom, just like a speck. You get a bunch of them together, they're like 100 pieces of sand, but they also act like waves. So they act like a particle, but they also act like a wave. And it's just an interesting little fact that they can cancel each other out like a wave can, they can add to each other like a wave can, but they're also just like particles. Anyway, the parts of a wave, if you can fit this in your notes, you see that we have a wave here, and that wave starts here, goes up, down, back up. From one point in that wave to the other point is what's called one wavelength. Okay, so this is one wavelength, one whole trough to one whole trough. How tall a wave is called the amplitude of that wave. Okay. These are just a couple little facts that we should know about waves before we move on. A few other things. The frequency of a wave is simply how many waves go past in just 1 second. So a frequency of 60 hertz, means 60 waves are going to go by in 1 second. So 60 waves per second. Now we're not going to use this a lot right now, but later on, hopefully we can point back to this point in your notes and say, okay, what's a hertz mean again? Well, it's waves per second. More on this later in the year. Up next, we talk about energy and wavelength and how those fit with these different things that we have along the side of the screen here. Now the first thing you'll see in your notes is that I have a down arrow right here on the edge of the page, going down, down, down to the bottom of that graphic. So way down here at the bottom when we get down to radio waves. As we are going down this length, we are increasing in wavelength. So to go down this graphic in your notes here, we are increasing in wavelength. Make sure you add that to your notes. As we're going down even in the same direction, so as we go down, down, down to the bottom, we're also decreasing in energy. So make sure you note that. That's a relationship between wavelength and energy that we see in the electromagnetic field. But starting back here at the top, the smallest wavelength, the highest energy, is the gamma ray. The gamma ray is very, very, very small, and it can damage your DNA. In other words, it's very harmful to you, and you don't want to mess with gamma rays at all. Okay. Moving down, so increasing in wavelength but decreasing in energy, is the X-ray. Now X-rays are very, very small still, and they can go through your flesh, meaning your muscles and your tissues and your skin and blood and everything else, but it cannot go through your bone. This is why X-rays are basically pictures of your bones. So that's X-ray. Moving down further yet, we have ultraviolet. So ultraviolet is what causes your sunburns. The sun gives off a lot of ultraviolet light. A good amount comes to the earth, and it'll start giving you sunburns if you stay out in it too long. Moving down, we have visible light. Okay, now that visible light is made up of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And these are all the colors we see with our eyes. This visible light, when it goes in our eyes, that's what we end up seeing when we are awake during the day and can see things. This visible light in the electromagnetic spectrum is very, very useful to us. Violet is the highest energy. So if this is a spectrum right here, violet is at the highest energy point, right before ultraviolet. Red on the other end of violet is down here, the lowest energy. And if you get even lower than red, you are infrared. Infrared is what we feel as heat. If you walked by a hot stove and felt heat coming off that stove, you are feeling the infrared light that stove is giving off. And there are hundreds of these per millimeter, so they're pretty small, but not as small as these things that are small as atoms up here. So we're getting bigger and we're getting weaker. Up next are microwaves, which are about a centimeter in size. Of course, they're used for microwaves, but also they can be used for radar, and satellites use them a lot. Lastly, radio waves. They're huge, low energy waves that are used for radios. So these notes are pretty simple overall. The only thing that I need you to really understand is that all of these things are pretty much the same thing in terms of an electromagnetic wave. There's a relationship between the increasing wavelength as you go down the list and decreasing energy. So they become less powerful as you go down, but they get longer and larger as you go down. That's it for the notes. Pretty simple. I kept it simple on purpose. So I hope you have a better understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum.